Hi, good afternoon and welcome. I hope you've had a fantastic day so far and are feeling a little bit kind of re-energized, coming into a slightly more light, airy room with a slightly cooler temperature. So welcome and thank you very much for coming along this afternoon. My name's Rebecca Edwards. I'm a Senior Manager for Research and Knowledge Exchange at Bournemouth University. I've been involved in knowledge exchange, starting off as a researcher some 20 years ago, which seems hard to believe, as a practitioner, and now very much as a manager. And I think it's a tremendously exciting time for knowledge exchange and the knowledge exchange agenda. And I think just the breadth of people that are attending in terms of this conference and the conversations that we're having are kind of tremendous in terms of seeing that growth at a real kind of pivotal time where people are looking at universities. And I think over the last 20 years, have never seen universities expected to be making so much of a difference in certain ways. And what's that meant in terms of how we shape universities and how we kind of create universities at the optimal environment in order that knowledge exchange can absolutely flourish. And I think we're seeing increasing drivers, if it's the Knowledge Exchange Concordat or different kind of funding instruments, that force us as institutions, if we're not already there, to be thinking about our internal culture. But of course, for anybody particularly that's working in universities and other types of institutes, there isn't a single unified vision of internal culture in many different organisations in different places, with many different competing agendas. I heard someone earlier on today talk about academics in terms of almost like running a small business because of the number of different plates that they have to keep spinning. And obviously, knowledge exchange, I'm sure some of you will have encountered this. There's a sense of, not another thing that I have to think about. So it's a challenging time to be thinking about that shift in terms of culture, a kind of knowledge exchange and creating those kind of optimal environments. And I think it's a particularly kind of challenging moment for us as for universities. We find ourselves in a kind of a strange position with increasing financial pressures impacting across the sector in terms of inflation and, of course, the flat fees that we have for domestic students, the limits to immigration that we're seeing, and the issues that arises for international students. So although there's very much the driver that's saying to universities, absolutely, knowledge exchange is critical, we need to create that internal culture that enables it to flourish. We're doing so in an environment which in many respects is more fiscally challenging than we've ever seen before. So in terms of the session this afternoon, we've got some fantastic colleagues with us today who I'll introduce shortly. They're going to give us some insight from their perspective in a breadth of very different kind of roles and activities about what they've done to shape the right sort of internal culture that allows knowledge exchange to flourish. And also what some of their kind of challenges have been as well. Then in terms of the session, what we'll do is kind of move on, and I want to give you guys a bit of an opportunity, and this is where everyone kind of groans because it's afternoon nap time, an opportunity to curate a bit of space and thinking time from our kind of collective wisdom about what really works in terms of internal culture and how we overcome some of the barriers that we're facing. So, conscious of time, without further ado, I'd really like to introduce the panel and give them a bit of a round of applause. So we have Sarah Allen from Oxentia, Fraser Rowan from University of Glasgow, Linda Coe-Faringo from University of York, and Andy Jones from University of Exeter. Thank you. Now, I've asked them to do some real kind of short presentations and interjections to kind of get everybody thinking and kicking off this session. So if you hear the famous bell ringing, that's what's going on. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Sarah up to give us the first set of insights.
Thank you, Becca. So I'm Sarah Allison. I'm from Oxentia. We are an innovation management and technology commercialization company. We're based just in Oxford. And I'd like to also introduce my colleague who is sitting in the audience, Alexandra Bush. She is heading up our HE sector services line and will be around at the conference if you'd like to talk to her or I. And actually, we have two more colleagues also at the conference, Britta Wyatt and Hamish McAlpine. floating around. So definitely do, if you have anything you'd like to talk about or just learn more about our company, please do catch up with them. In terms of our higher education support offering, I'm not going to go through this in detail because I only have 5 to 7 minutes, but we really do offer a wide breadth of support for both professional services teams, academics, and student entrepreneurs. And it's not just, as you can see, capacity building. We also are supporting with delivering impact as well. So you can see there, I'm not going to go through each of these offerings today, but if you do have a challenge in your knowledge exchange and you would like any support, we are here. So today I'm going to be, because we work with a lot of universities, both within the UK but also abroad, I'm going to be talking about how you can engage with university stakeholders to enhance and grow knowledge exchange. And that links to internal culture because it really is primarily about people. And we understand, and we see that universities are all on different, there's a huge diversity of universities, both within the UK and abroad, and they're all on different knowledge exchange journeys, and they have different approaches and different focuses. It's a really complex landscape, both external to universities and also internally. Lots of moving parts for each KE pathway. And so internal culture these are sort of general trends. It's really, if it's working well, it can really break down barriers. So for example, getting those senior stakeholders, getting their buy-in, and it can grow knowledge exchange and impact. And that, when I say that, I mean in terms of the quality, but also the quantity of KE and impact. And of course, it can diversify income, knowledge exchange, through those different pathways that lowers the risk, spreads risk. And really, internal culture is about creating a shared understanding. This is a trend that we really see between senior stakeholders, but also cross-faculty, alignment of strategy, and using and having effective systems, processes, and policies in place. And I think this really links in well with the talks and presentations that we listened to earlier on this morning. For example, Jessica Corners talking about the importance of spin-out and the activity that's been going on in that space recently. So, we thought about what are the sort of key themes or success factors which help to enable change in internal culture towards enhancing and growing knowledge exchange. And we came up with 3 from our experience of working with all these universities. So the first one was people. As I've already mentioned, they're really key to internal culture. You really need to have stakeholder buy-in, and that can be a big challenge. Solutions to that, which we will be going through later on in the session, are one solution that we find quite effective is to be able to evidence what it is you're trying to do, and also to be able to show the benefits or the opportunity to each of those different stakeholders, so senior leadership, the academics who are involved in the ideation and delivery, and also the different professional staff members who are involved in a particular KE pathway. So if you're thinking about spin-out, think of all of the different teams within the university who are involved. It's also really important to give academic staff the opportunity to explore and ideate and incentivize. I've heard a lot of this recently today, but be able to incentivize them for that as well. And of course, that internal marketing and training is necessary to really bring them on board, bring everyone on board, both academics, but also senior leadership. And so, yeah, there's a real importance of internal marketing and training. The second success factor or theme is around communication. So it's really about having a shared purpose and understanding of what you're trying to do and why, and being able to articulate that in the language of that particular stakeholder. It's having those communication channels within the university and using the existing ones and thinking about whether it's really necessary to create new ones or not. So an example of this I was thinking about is, it could be as simple to move something forward and create change in internal culture. It could be as simple as just adding an agenda item to an existing committee meeting so that people can see what's coming up on the horizon. Or it could be a bit more complicated. Perhaps you need to create a new committee of experts, external experts, to help advise, to bring in and start a new knowledge exchange pathway, such that if you haven't been doing spin-outs before, maybe you need that to help support the existing members of the university. And finally, you need those systems, processes, and policies. And I've put little weighing scales here with some pebbles, because it really is a balance. If you have too much of this, or they're not the right ones, can really hinder progress. And if you're trying to push through a change, it can really hinder that. But then there's also a risk of not having enough systems, processes, and policies, because things can happen and it's not controlled, and that creates not confusion, but doubt as to whether that's the right thing to do. So you need those things in place. It needs to be really thought through. I feel like knowledge exchange is a little bit like a roller coaster, and those pathways. So you need things in place, such as frameworks, to be able to control those, so that you're managing risk, managing expectations, and building trust and confidence across all the levels of the university. And finally, you need to have decision points in there so that they can be made clearly and transparently. And of course, underpinning all of that, you need your tools and templates that really support that process. And obviously, a framework is a really good way to do that. And that's one of the things that we've often been implementing in universities around the UK. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to move swiftly on, and then we'll come on to some Q&A at the end.
Good afternoon, folks. This might be a challenge for me because I'm a bit of a wanderer. That doesn't work with a fixed mic. My name's Fraser Rowan. I'm the Knowledge Exchange and Innovation Manager in the College of Arts at the University of Glasgow. I've been doing that role now I've been doing a role similar to that in the University of Glasgow for around about 18 years. So I started off originally as a business development manager within science, because that's where my background lies. But my passion firmly lies within arts and humanities, so I moved into that college within the university round about 12 years ago. And so over those 18 years, I've seen a huge change in the way that the internal culture is structured and how it actually functions and where it's successful. One of the biggest flips that I saw was when the RAE, if any of you remember that, flipped to becoming the REF. And at that point it changed, because I used to go round doors chapping in academic stores. Fabulous, I can wander. I won't turn into a comedian, don't worry. I used to have to chap in people's doors and say, what are you up to? What research are you doing? Would you be interested in engaging with folks outside the university? And then in 2014, when the REF came along, that all changed and people started chapping in my door. So I learned a lot from that, because the culture shift there was more of a kick. It wasn't so much of an option anymore. You had to think more about your value, or the academic value, outside the walls of the institution. So that was really interesting. It was a turning point for me at that stage. And up until that point, what I had been doing was listening to academics. You need to be careful, don't fall off this. Listening to academics, finding out what they're interested in, and then creating links between them and the outside world. The purveyors, if you like. So if they're interested in X, Y, and Z, I would link them up with someone that was interested as well. And that worked. And it still works. And that's the traditional view. And it's great. It does do the job. It works really well for REF. It works really well for internal promotion. It brings in money. It can spin commercialization opportunities. It can bring in students. It can address the employability agenda. It can do all of those sort of lovely things. But it's quite blinkered. And it's really driven by the academic curiosity. And as I say, that's a great thing. Let's not knock that. It is good. But what I've done with the Arts and Humanities Partnership Catalyst is kind of flipped that. Rather than focusing on the academic curiosity, what does the sector need? And that's given us a different approach. So we have identified sectors within the College of Arts where we've got research strengths. For example, the first one was called Digital Cultural Heritage. And I went out and engaged a lot of the really big organisations that are involved in digital cultural heritage. All the Scotlands, If you go to Scotland, everything's called Scotland. So you've got Historic Environment Scotland, National Library of Scotland, National Museums of Scotland. It goes on. It's endless. They're all Scotland. And so engaged all of them and engaged a lot of the really smaller organisations as well. And spent quite a lot of time with them to find out what their challenges were. And how we might make a difference in the world outside of the organisation. So by finding out what their challenges were, we were able to match up academics with those challenges. And this went right across the university. It's not just the College of Arts, although that's my focus. So what we do is we engage the academics in something that they now find really quite exciting. And one of the... team structure, why have I got that there? It was really to show you that we're not doing that ourselves. Because one of the really important things about getting people in a room like this and engaging them and trying to get them to think about challenges and how we might address those challenges and to create projects is that we've pulled in partnership with Glasgow School of Art, in particular the Innovation School. Those guys are design geniuses. So they're the ones that are creating all the systems and the toolkits. How am I for time? They're the ones that are creating all the systems and the toolkits that we're employing when we get together, the Catalyst meets, if you like. The research context is on two levels. The first one, the macro level, is the process. And this stuff is really cool. It's really interesting. It's completely new to me, and that's given me a drive to do it more. Let's not go into that, off on a tangent. So, yeah, we're employing design-led approaches to knowledge exchange, which is quite unique. I haven't seen it anywhere else, but I'd be really happy for other folks to point out where that is happening. And the micro-level sectors is working in specific areas. So, as I mentioned before, our first one was digital cultural heritage. The second one is food, sustainability, health, heritage, and tourism. It's a bit of a catch-all. There's nothing that's not in there. And the one that we're about to bring online just now is mental health and well-being. There's an area within Glasgow, I was speaking to some of the folks in the panel about this earlier, and it's called GRID, Glasgow Riverside Innovation District. And that's a real focus to try and to develop the area. And so that's the fourth one that's coming online later this year. Okay, I've skipped things a wee bit. So yeah, we started back in May with the first one, then August, and these things don't stop. Actually, I'll U-turn on that. If all the activity within them stops, if the participants, if the partners are no longer getting anything from this, and we lose the interest of the academics, that's when it stops. But we're certainly not seeing any of this, where partners are really engaged. The academics are really engaged, which is really cool. It's an interesting step in the right direction. Methods and co-evaluation. I won't go into this, but so if you think about right at the start when I mentioned I engaged all the partners and we find out what their key sector-based challenges were. That's what you see in the board there in the far left-hand side. So we had 4 challenges. They're quite difficult to fix. They're massive. They're really challenging to fix. So the first thing we did was use an innovation map. Subtle. So we used an innovation map to start to break away these challenges down to bite-sized chunks. And that's really where we are just now. We have created a number of projects. They're all really small. And when you think about those projects, you think they're never going to hit those big targets, but they're all scalable. Anyway, this is to give you an idea of the DCH network. I told you there's a lot of Scotland's in there. Anyway, I shall stop there, but I'll be more than happy to have any conversations with anybody who wants to learn more. Thank you.
Oh, hang on. Sorry, just close challenges. Right. while that's getting pulled up, hi, I'm Linda Cofrigno. I'm the University Impact Manager from the University of York. And today I'm going to tell you a bit about a public engagement project that we've been working on for the past 2 years or so. So I think it's safe to say that historically, although we've done really some excellent public engagement work at York, we just never did it in any sort of strategic or sort of joined up way. And we were made painfully aware of this the first time that we had to write a public and community engagement narrative for the KEF a few years ago. I see a couple people chuckling because they were probably involved in that too. Right, so I'm hoping that my slides are now sorted and I can move on, right? Fantastic. Following on from that period of self-reflection of what we really needed to do in terms of public engagement, we then commissioned the National Coordinating Center for Public Engagement, or the NCCPE, to do a review about how we could enhance provision for public engagement. And that was done about 2 years ago now. There were specific actions and recommendations to come out of that, and those were to be taken forward within the context of our KE Concordat action plan at York. And so we ended up putting together a PE working group, public engagement, PE, and that comprised of both academics as well as professional services staff members. So one of the things to come out of that NCCPE review was the view that what we really needed to do was to have a collective conversation so we could have some sort of shared understanding of what our aspirations are around public engagement. And so what we did was we launched a scoping survey. So I'm now on, let's see, the third chevron, I think it is, along the lines, under collective conversations, where we launched the scoping survey for both individuals as well as departments. We gave them a good long stretch. We launched it in July. We said during the course of the summer, particularly in departments, please consult very widely and then come back and respond to the survey questions. Once we had those departmental responses, we then had a whole series of meetings, faculty by faculty, to then have sort of the next level conversation to see if there were sort of faculty level views on public engagement. And so those surveys were asking them about ongoing activity, as well as really what their aspirations are and, you know, what do you want PE to look like in the future? From all of that, we gathered all of those responses, all of that information, and then working with that working group, we developed them into a series of recommendations. So those have only just been taken to the University Partnerships, Enterprise, and Engagement Committee earlier in this week, and I'm happy to report that those recommendations have been agreed in principle, so that's fantastic. What I'm going to do here is just show you a few of the quotes. I'm not going to read them out. You can read them yourselves. But my favorite quote on all of them is the one at the top, which is, "It's great to see that this is being taken seriously at last," which I think was the sentiment for a lot of practitioners that are out there. As you'll see, the responses came in under sort of a variety of different themes: leadership and direction, time, recognition, support, and collaboration. All of these will sound familiar to anybody working in KE. So although the survey was specifically about public engagement, I think a lot of what came out is relevant to knowledge exchange more generally. So while it's really difficult to measure culture change, I think one of the things that was really interesting about the process was just by asking some questions, it really prompted some new discussions and some new activity that we didn't anticipate would immediately happen just from asking them some questions in the survey. Just as one example, one of the departments had a series of meetings within the department to discuss how they wanted to respond to the survey. That then prompted them to go for internal funding for enhancing research culture funding, which they got, and they are now in the process of putting on a series of seminars and engagement opportunities where they're bringing in staff and they're talking about external engagement. And that's the kind of thing that would not have happened, I think, had those discussions not started. So it's really encouraging. We haven't even come up with specific actions from our recommendations yet, and already there's the beginning of culture change because of those conversations that we've been able to have. So I'm just going to use the remaining time just to talk a little bit about what worked well. So I've highlighted the fact that we had a good chunk of time, so from July to November for these conversations, first across the individuals and the departments, and then we also had a good chunk of time between the working group with academics and the professional services working in there. At the launch of the scoping survey, we had the full support of our Pro-Vice Chancellor of Partnerships Engagement. This was really key, and we had well-coordinated comms from our central team as well. We did need to repeat over and over and over again the rationale for doing this work, but that's okay, it was worth it. And I think as a result, we got really very thoughtful responses coming back. I've already mentioned the working group and how dedicated and committed they were to really helping us think this through and shape things into a set of recommendations. Last but certainly not least, I was part of a very small, close-knit team that was working on pushing this forward. So all of this work was led by Helen Jones, who's the Faculty Impact Manager for Arts and Humanities at York, and I was working closely with Helen as well as with Natalie Fullwood and Rebecca Senior. Of course, there were some things that did not work quite as well. So, for example, we got stuck in definitions. So even though we wanted to have discussions about the more substance stuff, we got to the point where we understood that we needed to start every meeting with just, these are the definitions. Otherwise, you'd spend the entire meeting just arguing about what the definitions were or weren't. I'm seeing some nodding, so I think other people have dealt with this before. We hit some snags about not getting buy-in from all areas. We were able to move past that, but that was, of course, an issue, and I think buy-in is one of the themes that certainly across the panel members we've talked about quite a bit. I'm just going to move on to sort of overall reflections and lessons learned. So really, the main one is the value of having had this collective conversation. And just like Sarah was saying, it's about the people, and it's about the comms, and it's about those conversations. And so Helen and I used to joke that the two of us could just sit down, and we'd just write out some recommendations. And 85% of them would be exactly identical to having gone through this one-year process. And while that's true, the value in it was really getting people talking and getting the entire community to have some sense of shared ownership about this initiative. And so taking the time to do that was incredibly valuable. One of the other things that we needed to do was to ensure that we had the balance right about top-down versus bottom-up. So although the scoping survey was launched top-down, it was specifically designed to get views from the grassroots level. I'm just going to skip across some of the other ones and just highlight the one that's my main take-home message, is it really took a lot of time and it took patience. So although things aren't moving quickly, things are moving in the right direction, and really that's the thing that is most important. Culture change doesn't happen quickly, but doing it right is really important. Finally, just to say, that is my email address. Please feel free to get in touch and have to take questions later. Thank you.
I have the microphone because I thought it'd be really small next to me, but it's not too bad, so I'll put that back over here. Yeah, so, I am Andy Jones. I'm the Haas Impact Fellow, University of Exeter, so that's Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences. A bit of a background for who I am. I was previously a postdoctoral researcher in theology and religion, kind of a philosopher engaged in big ethical problems is the way that I sell it to people. So I work on regenerative farming, ethics of nuclear innovation, and capturing and evidencing social good from research. I have 4 years' experience working on these kind of industry-engaged projects, and I currently support commercialization for Haas academics, and I've been doing that since March 2022. So I have first-hand experience of a lot of the kind of barriers and drivers to engaging with industry, which is what I'm going to talk about today. So a background to what I'm talking about here is that there's certain kind of assumptions that I think well, that I have within academia at least. I think that, for instance, there's greater support for projects which have these big pre-existing relationships with non-academic partners, and they have this proven track record of impact. So there's this kind of culture of backing the winners in academia, and that smaller collaborations with non-academic partners often kind of fall under the radar. So I think that when you're in a HAS environment, basically what this means is that there's a lot of stuff not being counted, and individually, even though these kind of research relationships might be quite small, collectively they're pretty big. I would say that the 95% of research, or whatever it is, which doesn't get counted, probably outweighs that which does get counted in terms of the benefits. And I think this really is an unintended consequence of the REF, right? So we focus on those big projects because we want those big 4-star case studies, but there's not much incentive to be counting that little stuff at the moment, at least. So the stuff that I was working on was that I did a bunch of interviews with people at different career stages last year. So this was postgraduate researchers, early career researchers, and senior researchers was the way I split it up. I interviewed about 30 people, did some workshops, and I was trying to figure out what the drivers and barriers were for engagement at different career levels, because on top of that difference of the allocation of support, there's also the allocation of support based on your career stage, right? So what I found was that at certain stages there were some good aspects, some drivers for engaging with partners, but there were also some barriers. So I won't go through them all. If you want to see the report, get in touch, I can send it to you. But kind of what was interesting was that senior researchers didn't always see the benefits of engaging with partners. If they hadn't done it to this point, they've already got the job, so why would they want to engage in it now? And PGRs, for instance, well, for one thing, they really didn't understand the knowledge of knowledge exchange from the ones that I was talking to in humanities, arts, and social science. They didn't know knowledge exchange, they didn't know impact. They said that supervisors were actively telling them not to engage with the partners which were most related to their research, because essentially they felt that their supervisors were afraid they wouldn't submit in 4 years. So that was the kind of the driving force behind that. And they also felt that as kind of early career researchers or PhD students, that they weren't taken as seriously by those kind of industry partners that they worked with. And then on the flip side, kind of senior researchers, they had more struggles with time. They've already got full workloads, they're time poor. And another one would be, for instance, they have these long-standing collaborations, some of them. So things which have happened naturally decades ago are now expectations for people coming into kind of the workforce now. So there's that sense in which the people who we're taking advice from weren't people who were expected to do well, in a sense. It just so happened that way, and kind of the tide turned in their favor. So these are things I think we should be thinking about when we're talking about knowledge exchange and our kind of research culture, is essentially how do we support people coming forward now? And I have one more slide, and it's just about kind of things that matter when we're thinking about the kind of projects that we have. So essentially, I think, project size, the stage of project development, the career stage of the PI, the type of industry partner that we're working with. So I've been working with the KTP team in Exeter a lot, and, we work with charities, we work with SMEs. And in HAS, that's kind of disproportionately high, but it means that they usually can't access those kind of KTP opportunities, even though they're heavily subsidized. So unlike, engineering, where kind of the business case is very obvious and the profits are very obvious for the business, in HAS we have to think a bit more dynamically. And and that falls into the kind of types of outcome of the project. So in HAS-based projects, we have much more kind of social goods, lower kind of economic value based on those projects, but they're doing more important work for the community. So please do get in touch. I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn, just Andy Jones and Exeter, Google it and I'll come up. And thank you, that's brilliant.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you so much. And a big thank you to all the panellists today. I think what we've just had is something of a whistle-stop tour, incredibly short time, so well done. And thank you very much for kind of keeping all to time. Disappointed I didn't get to use the bell more. But years and years and years of hard work and effort of doing things which almost, a lot of the time, are kind of invisible and behind the scenes, to really kind of create the conditions in which knowledge exchange can flourish and whether we can have impact. We've got a few minutes now just to take any questions. Please do put your hand up. I will, whilst you're thinking about that, I'll kind of take chair's privilege. And I suppose one reflection that I have from listening to all that you've had to say, across the piece, and very different experiences, which I think is really important to bring to the fore, is the importance of having space to think, and to think about kind of knowledge exchange, and to think in particular about how research connects to knowledge exchange and why it's meaningful and how it can be done. But of course, I can't believe that my university is the only university whereby colleagues will tell you on a very frequent basis that they have absolutely no time, no capacity. And, you know, I'm interested to know in terms of how you manage to squeeze that space and time for the reflection to happen. So I don't know if anyone would like to kick that one off.
It's an interesting question. I think one of the things that they did within Glasgow University is created opportunities for promotion and so on through knowledge exchange activity. And we're trying to not make it a here's something else you have to do, but connect the way that research flows into mobility and into partnership engagement and so on. So we're selling that as an overall package, which links in to the promotion, which makes it slightly easier. Don't know if that's answered your question, actually.
Sure, yeah. So I think in terms of the work that I do, I'm asked to do these kind of surveys and stuff because there's a recognition that something isn't working at the moment and it could work better. So I guess, you know, I'm given the time to try and support people without taking their time, because the problem is that when we're working with academics, they don't want to be, you know, being drawn into things which are also very kind of time consuming for them. So it's about understanding how we can have kind of directed engagements with them, which actually lead to something tangible for them, that they don't feel that it's just leading to nothing. But yeah, I guess that's the sense that role was created for me, to kind of take the pressure off them in a sense.
I'll just also answer that really quickly. I think we were really lucky in that a lot of the community was really primed. They're really interested to have the conversation of public engagement, and we just hadn't sort of driven that before. And then beyond that, it was actually quite boring. It was just getting things scheduled, and getting it scheduled during the course of the summer when everybody's a little bit more relaxed, and just sort of building that in, as well as putting in those faculty meetings into people's diaries and just getting people to come along. I'm sorry, it's not more interesting than that.
I will just make a very sort of slightly different angle to answer that question. Just thinking on the level of systems, processes, and policies, universities have these policies which say, you know, we'll provide X amount of time to you to do KE or do these other activities. But in reality, researchers, academic staff, students, there's not the time to do it. And so what it is, if you're thinking about internal culture, is, and the reason, there are loads of reasons, but one of them is often that the senior PIs are not aware of the benefits. So it's all around that communication at all these different levels. So if you want to enable, and also maybe even faculty heads, so it's about bringing them all together so that you can actually enact what's in your policy. So it's a slightly different angle, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great kind of selection of practical tips, and then through to actually making a kind of policy document come to life. And I think we've got one there, and then, just there, 2, 3.
Thank you. My name's Orla Kelly. I work across universities in Scotland, including Glasgow. Fraser, I don't know you. It'd be good to have a coffee with you sometime. I observe around professional services staff that if there's something has knowledge exchange or innovation, it gets punted down the line to the tech transfer office or whatever it's called. But there's responsibility that sits with the REF managers or research impact people or the researcher developers. And these teams typically work in silos. And so there's something that needs to happen culturally amongst the professional services staff. So just keen to ask the panel their perspective on that.
Yeah, I think that's a very pertinent point, and I think becoming all the more important when we look at some of the proposed changes, particularly in terms of REF and the data that will go in there. But I don't know if anyone would like to kick off.
It's the last time I'm going first. The REF completely amplifies the siloing just because of the way that it's been submitted. But what we've done is try to drop REF as a goal, and we've got the centralised tech transfer office, and then each of the 4 colleges have got their own tech transfer offices. But we've linked through systems, for example, pipeline systems for impact and for KE. We have Impact Accelerator accounts across all 4 colleges, and we can all apply to each other's Impact Accelerator accounts. So those sort of things have really gelled the 4 colleges together, and things like the Catalyst as well is doing that job.
So I've been in post for about 5 years now, and when I initially started, I was in a different part of research and enterprise than sort of the KE teams. So because I was representing, Impact was over here and KE was over here, and one of the things that has happened over the past couple years is that I've been now integrated into that KE team. Post-ref, I've been sort of doing more KE work, and some of it is coming together. I will say that where our directorate is research, innovation, and knowledge exchange, if you look at the organogram, it doesn't make any sense at all. However, we all as individuals are sort of doing the work that we're doing, and we try and work together, basically ignoring the organogram to a certain degree, and I hope that there's nobody here from York to report that. No? Okay.
I can make one quick comment on that. From a sort of strategy level, it's really important, if you do have a strategy, to make sure everyone's aware of it. And so if people are working in silos and you want to bring them together, do that. Create meetings, bring them together and talk about what you're trying to do, the benefits, and try and think about what is the benefit for that particular stakeholder. And just get them talking about why they don't think it's important, and you'll start to understand. And then you can move forward from there.
That's brilliant, and I think so much of finding that kind of common ground on challenges, and I'm a great believer also in the power of tea and cake in terms of bringing disparate parts of a university together. But can I go over to our next question?
I'm Rebecca and I'm from York, just to follow on from what Linda just said. and I'm sorry, Fraser, you say you didn't want to go first next, but my question is actually specifically for you. So sorry about that. But you talked about I was really interested in your sectoral and kind of market-based approach. And you talked about one of your groupings being quite all-encompassing. I can't remember the different areas, but there was a few different areas together. And I was really interested in how do you figure out then who should be involved in that when it's quite a wide sector? Like, who do you approach, and how is it getting businesses engaged with that when it is quite wide?
Are you meaning how do I get the people involved internally or externally or both?
Externally.
Externally.
Yeah, specifically externally, yeah.
The first approach there was actually so let's talk about digital cultural heritage, for example. So we've got quite a strong research strength there, strong strength. And speaking to those academics that already had the partnerships was the point that those things really kicked off from. We were able to identify who those key partners were and how we had worked with them in the past. And then beyond that, speaking to the partners, they then started to tell us the other people that should be involved. So it's around about a 3 to 4 month build-up before the actual first event, bringing people together in that catalyst structure, because there's a lot of behind the curtain type activity goes on.
I hate to say it, Fraser, but I've got one for you as well. You mentioned that the partnerships kind of run until they run out of steam. Is that dependent on high-level internal buy-in and financial support as a precursor to setting those up? Or is there some other funding mechanism or way to keep those going that you're able to draw on?
We don't fund anything at the very start, so there's no funding input to any of it. It's more about aligning those partner long-term strategic goals with our research interests, and when those things start to align, everything sort of falls in place at that point. But as I mentioned before, we've got an impact accelerator within the College of Arts, and we've started to exploit the funding there for smallish projects that are getting off the ground. But surprisingly enough, this has needed very little investment.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really sorry. This question is related to Glasgow again, but it might be other people might be able to feed in as well. I was really interested in taking the outside-in approach. I look after the IAAs at Cranfield, and we have external members on the committees, and they're struck. They always say they're so struck at how inward-facing universities are. And, you know, everybody else started with the academics and speaking to everybody in the university, and you've tried something different. And we want to do something like that. But there's almost a sense of panic of, oh my God, what are we going to do if all these new companies that we don't know go, yeah, we want to work with you? And how do we matchmake, and how do you filter and work out that these are going to be the right sort of people to build partnerships with?
That's a good question. We actually purposely started really small because the processes, the innovation mapping processes, worked best optimized with about 20 people in the room. So we went for 10 academics, 10 non-academics, and it was actually difficult to get it down to 20. And as the process develops, there's some partners that go, actually, this isn't for us. One organisation has stopped altogether. Another organisation said, I'm not the right person, but there's someone else that is. So we've swapped people over. Predominantly, the academics have stayed the same. We actually have a cohort of PGRs and students that are involved in it as well. So it's more a case of trying to keep the numbers smaller than anything. But I'm happy to chat with you.
Just very briefly add to that. I think it's kind of very important where you kind of know yourself and your institution, and I say that speaking from a post-92 institution with, you know, far less kind of capacity from that respect, and it's knowing, you know, in terms of what you can deliver on and what you can be kind of really effective on, because some of the areas whereby there is less of that kind of capacity and strength, that's going to be kind of more problematic when you've got kind of limited resources, which for me makes that internal conversation about actually what you're really good at as an institution and networking with colleagues across the institution. And for me, that's our sort of business development function, of ensuring that they have a real clear awareness of absolute kind of strengths, our priorities, and what are going to be our kind of strategic drivers to really help us kind of prioritise. But I think, you know, in some ways that sort of too many businesses knocking on your door would be a lovely, lovely problem for some of us to have, I'm sure. But in other ways, it's just thinking about, okay, what can we be really strong at and deliver on to kind of build a future platform and argument for it. So I think it was that. Good.
Thank you. Hi, David Coleman, University of Birmingham. You know, this is a session on culture, and of course, at the moment, we're operating in this interesting environment where, you know, we're being accused of being a little bit too greedy in terms of, you know, specifically commercialisation. And I just wondered whether, for those that have kind of consulted with others and trying to get more people involved, did the topic of financial incentive come up at all, or indeed conflict of interest?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it does. It's a really good point. But it just depends how you frame what you're talking about. And if you're talking about research commercialization, that is often a common misconception that from, as you're nodding, from academic staff, that they think what you're asking them to do is sort of sell their soul. All you're interested in is the financial reward, and that's it. But there's so many other rewards that come, as we all know, with doing knowledge exchange. And so yes, but it's about communicating and really showcasing those other benefits through case studies, events. Hope that answers your question a little bit.
So I'm an impact manager, and although economic impacts are important, they're one of sort of a spectrum of a variety of other impact types. I would say that at the university we have one of the 8 transformational initiatives is about building industry engagement and income. Initially, I think it was just called industry income. And there are a couple professional services staff people particularly that work to get the engagement in there, that yes, income is an important part of the piece, but it's not all of it, and that there are a lot of other sort of non-financial measures of engagement that are also going to be important as part of our vision to be this university of public good.
Yeah, I mean, I think that commercialization is really like an important thing which gets talked about in universities at the moment, and I think in our university, what we have a problem with is how you quantify it against other kinds of products that can come out of research. So, like social goods, for instance, when does a project generate enough social goods to be more valuable than a project which generates some commercial value? That's something that I don't think we could answer in our university, and I don't think other universities have an answer to that at the moment either. So I think that would be a helpful step in the right direction to understand how we balance different values in research, because I think for some people, they have projects which generate lots of social goods, but we just don't know how to quantify that against projects which generate kind of commercial outputs. I mean, so this is something else I'm looking at in another piece of work is, so for instance, the Times Higher Education uses the Sustainable Development Goals, which the UN use, and they're quite an interesting list of different kind of social goods that at the very bottom, academics could narrate their project in a way, say that my project helps develop a social good in this area and it generates this much benefit here. And I think that that's kind of the first step of teaching people how to think about their research differently, is to give them the narrative to be able to explain to someone what the other goods look like and how we can start quantifying them. So, yeah.
As I'm based in the College of Arts, it was quite easy. Because a lot of our colleagues just didn't think that commercialisation was for them at all. And an interesting thing happened a couple of years ago when our IP manager that's central to the university attempted to engage the college, and they found the language used was really abhorrent. The amount of kickback from the opportunities that these guys were putting out was quite something else, and it was when they flipped it to social enterprise and they started using a completely different language, I could see a glimmer of hope, and that really turned things around. It was really the language challenge within the College of Arts, because there's nothing wrong with making money, it's just that within the subject areas we have in the College of Arts, it's not really an opportunity that comes up very often.
That's brilliant, thank you. I'm going to move us on now slightly, just as we kind of start a really kind of good discussion and some really kind of thought-provoking questions there, for an opportunity for us to share practice around the room, because I think we're all on a journey. Well, please tell me if you do have the optimal KE culture and how you got there, because I'd love to know, and I'd then probably sell it to other universities. But what we're going to do is just sort of break out onto our tables. So I think we're fairly well spaced, but feel free to move around. And to think about some kind of key questions around that. And these were questions that very much come from, as we were planning and preparing this question, things that we kind of kept on coming back to, especially around kind of, resourcing, these things taking time. We've talked about bringing in capacity and that side of things. How do you get the buy-in from the sort of the unconverted? I think one of the things for us, and we've touched on this today, is we're seeing lots of multiple different drivers in terms of internal strategy, external strategies, etc., and different optimization. In fact, different executive teams that have different things that they want to see come out of it. So how do you really kind of blend that to have something that comes cohesive in terms of your kind of vision? And I think, kind of finally, it's just thinking about, any other ideas that you have or things that you've found kind of have worked really well. So there's a link at the bottom there in terms of a Padlet. We also have some writable tablecloths. So please don't write on the tablecloth, but there are some materials kind of just on top of the table, if that's a kind of a better way for you to screen. And what we'd like to do is to sort of bring some of this sort of insight together and have a kind of a bit of a summary in terms of this session, because it's, we're being asked to do more and more, and it's a challenging area to grapple with. But I know from people around the room, we've also got a vast wealth of experience and some really good practice that we can share, and perhaps some guidance to ourselves on the pitfalls to avoid. So we'll have about kind of 20 minutes, I think, and we'll sort of wander around. So off you go. Thank you.